I want to welcome you to our Braddock District community meeting on the Zoning Ordinance, also known as zMOD. Let me just kind of go over the format, and then I have a couple of unrelated news items to share before we get into the zMOD presentation. So we're going to start with a presentation from the Department of Planning and Development, and we have the great team here of Leslie Johnson, Carmen Bishop, and Casey as well. Thank you everyone for joining us. After their presentation, we'll open it up to questions from you all, and or if you want to just make a comment rather than a question, you can do that as well. And here's how we'll do that. In the Teams panel, the top bar contains most of the tools you'll need. In the center, there's an image of a camera. If you want to be shown on screen when you're speaking, click on it to turn it on. The microphone is just to the right. Please be sure to keep your microphone muted. Staff will unmute meeting participants when they are recognized to speak. There are two ways to be recognized. First, in that top bar, there's an outline of a hand, which is the third from the left. Click on it to raise your hand to indicate you would like to ask a question or make a comment. I'll try to call on people in the order in which they raise their hands. Please click on that hand again after you're finished with your question to lower your hand so we don't call on you again. If you're having trouble raising your hand or you just want to raise a question without speaking, you can use the chat function at the bottom right of the screen. Type in your question and both I and the other meeting participants will be able to view it. We'll also try to get to any questions that are submitted that way through the chat. I want to let you know, you may have heard the announcement, but the meeting will be recorded and posted online for those who are unable to attend, and the PowerPoint presentation from tonight will be posted there as well. A couple of news items and reminders. This Saturday, we will be hosting, I think it's our fourth Stuff the Bus, Braddock District Stuff the Bus food drive since the beginning of the pandemic. We will be at the Braddock District office, Burke Center Commons Community Center, and the Panino building from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. on Saturday. So please, if you can, come by and donate some canned items, non-perishable goods. All the food from the Braddock District goes to ECHO, a great nonprofit in Springfield that really needs your support, especially given the ongoing pandemic. Just one COVID and vaccine note. We did get news today that the governor is adjusting the process whereby vaccine doses are distributing to localities across Virginia, and unfortunately not in a way that will help us. They're switching to a per capita formula rather than the formula they had been using, which was based on which jurisdictions were most successful in administering vaccines. So we do expect that will further slow down the number of doses we're able to administer in Fairfax County. And just to put it into context, we currently have 168,000 people who are eligible in the first two phases, 1A and 1B, and we have 22,000 vaccine doses on hand. So unfortunately, we still don't have the doses that we need to really ramp up the vaccines, but we are in the Fairfax Health District vaccinating people as quickly as we receive vaccines. So if you're on that list and you've registered, we will get to you. It's just based on the supply of vaccines that we get from Virginia and that Virginia gets from the federal government. And finally, I suspect most of you in this meeting have already done this, but if you haven't already, please subscribe to our Braddock Beacon and Walkinshaw Advisory email updates. You can either email us at braddock@fairfaxcounty.gov if you'd like to subscribe, or go to fairfaxcounty.gov/Braddock. And with that, I will go ahead and introduce our presenters. I also just want to recognize our Braddock District Planning Commissioner, Mary Cortina, who's here. Thank you, Mary, for joining. And with that, I'll introduce our presenters, Carmen Bishop and Casey Judge of the county's Department of Planning and Development. So I will turn it over to Carmen to start the presentation.
Good evening, thank you. So Casey's going to share her screen and we will walk through our slides. At this point, I feel like I have to apologize to some of you because I know that you've seen this presentation before, but thank you. Maybe you'll take something, a little nugget away that's new each time. And if you can give the presentation just as well, then I guess you can pass it along to others. But Casey and I will be tag teaming this presentation as we always do, and we'll move through the slides and then we'll be looking forward to the question and answer and discussion at the end. So we have been working on this project for over 3 years now, really. We had our official kickoff in January of 2018. And after some initial background work, we started our work on the use regulations. And here we released them in installments. We had about 4 different installments for the uses, and then we put them all together. That did result in a complete draft of the use regulations that was dated July 1, 2019. And then the board on July 16th did endorse that work on that, the use regulation portion. And then we moved on to the other articles and kind of the plain language part, and we released those in installments as well. And then we put it all together for a complete draft that was dated June 30th, 2020. And then since then, Casey and I have been even more, we were doing it before, but even more so since then, we've been on a big roadshow of presentations, talking to people in all areas of the county. And then we made revisions based on that and to the draft that was dated November 24th. And that's what is our public hearing draft. And the board did authorize scheduling of public hearings. So we have the Planning Commission public hearing. It is this Thursday. And then the board public hearing is scheduled for March 9th. And then I also want to add in here that we did release a few additional, mostly technical edits with a red line copy just January 19th. So that kind of brings us up to date. And here you can see it's our new lean mean ordinance structure, just 9 articles pared down from our current 20 articles and 6 appendices. And then Casey, on this slide, do we still have the animations? Yeah, so this will walk you through what I just said, where you can kind of see how it all fits together. We did first Article 4, that's where you find all of the use regulations. And that was that final July 1, 2019 draft. And then after that, we moved on to Articles 2 and 3, which was in August of 2019. And that's our zoning districts and our overlay districts. And then we moved on to Articles 5, 6, and 7, which is the development standards, parking and loading, and signs. And we finished it up with the boring stuff, Articles 1 and 8. That's our general provisions. And then, of course, Article 8 has the best acronym ever, Administration Procedures and Enforcement. And then, as I said, we did put it all together for, now I guess you could say we have 3 versions of a complete draft. And outreach has been a big component of our project the whole way through. We are up to, this is our 95th public meeting. Some of them were in person. Some have been, a lot of them actually have been both in person and virtual. And then of course, since COVID, we've had just virtual, but we've had a lot of public meetings and which have had a huge impact on our project. The project does have a strong online presence. We have a great website with all our documents and presentations there. And we use a wide variety of ways to try to get the word out and to receive feedback, including, well, for instance, it's been mentioned in your Braddock newsletter. We use Facebook, Channel 16. If you don't like to read, we have videos. We've done a few surveys, and then we've also worked with some work groups. We have a citizens work group, land use attorneys, builders and industry. We talk to our land use aides like Marcia. So the work groups have served a great purpose of a sounding board for ideas, and then they also serve as liaisons to the other individuals and groups that they are affiliated with. We want to thank you for having us back for this 6th presentation, I guess, in the Braddock area. And then, of course, in addition to meetings that are focused on a certain district, we've had a number of general community meetings. In that picture there, it shows it was showing me and Casey back when we had shorter hair and in person in the government center.
This is where I come in. We have many reasons on why we want to update the ordinance, but we'll highlight a couple of them for you tonight. So the first, Carmen did allude to, our current ordinance is very unintuitive in terms of its format and its structure. There's 20 different articles, 6 appendices, and they're all located in individual PDFs. So in order to navigate, it's very difficult to go in between articles and find the relevant information that you need. So our proposed zMOD draft brings all that information together in an intelligible document that you can navigate through easily. The next reason is really with our land uses. The ordinance was adopted in 1978, so it's over 40 years old. Things have changed in Fairfax County since 1978. You would never guess that we'd have electric vehicle charging and trampoline parks and cat lounges like this picture is showing here. So most of the substantive edits with zMOD are in that Article 4 and relate to the uses and their associated regulations. If you've read our ordinance, you will see that there's tons of legal jargon and antiquated language throughout the ordinance as well. There's a lot of heretofores and notwithstandings, and a lot of times it takes you 3 or 4 times reading a sentence to figure out what it actually means. So we've taken what we've called our plain English approach, plain language, with our zMOD draft to make sure that it's understandable and you can figure out exactly where you want to put a shed in your yard without reading it 7 times over and over again. And last but not least, we do want to make sure that our new zoning ordinance is accessible on different platforms. It's currently very difficult to pull it up if you're out and about on your cell phone or your tablet. So we want to make sure that our new platform can be accessible, not just from a hard copy or from your desktop. We have taken a very graphic approach with our new ordinance, which we're very excited about. This is just an example of some of the updated user-friendly tables and graphics. These tables here are included in our zoning district articles, and they show you all the lot and building dimensional standards. And then they give you a key of, what does this mean and where are you measuring that? So we've taken that approach in addition to the regulations and in the words themselves. As I mentioned, the uses are where the bulk of the substantive edits are occurring with zMOD. Some uses aren't changing, they're just getting a new name. So think of our current name for churches, chapels, temples, synagogues, and other places of worship. We're calling that religious assembly, but no changes are being proposed. Other uses are being consolidated when they're thinly sliced and finely grained into one overarching use. And then other uses we just wanted to, we've seen them as emerging and we wanted to treat them separately and call them out. So here's just a couple of examples of those uses, like electric vehicle charging, stacked townhouses, both indoor and outdoor commercial recreation, data centers, and goods distribution hub, which is that last mile delivery. We're also modernizing uses through the updating of standards. So a couple of uses here we wanted to highlight. First is the solar collection system. So this is your accessory solar panels that's providing mostly on-site, primarily meeting the on-site demands for energy. So this, we wanted to add a little bit of flexibility. We wanted to propose that if they're roof mounted, you can go 5 feet above the maximum building height. So that would allow a structure that was, already built, that's up to the maximum building height, to have a little bit more flexibility to encourage those solar panels. In terms of food trucks, this has been a very popular pandemic question. People want to eat safely and eat outside. So we have seen the rise in food trucks. And we have proposed to expand the flexibility to non-residential uses and residential districts. So think of your religious assembly uses, your community pools or community centers. So we would allow these to go in with an administrative permit up to 12 times per year. And additional times per year could be requested with the special exception or special permit approval. Now, there are still other standards that apply, such as 4-hour time frame and 3 trucks per site at one time. So there are still other limitations. It's not just a free-for-all in these districts. And then in terms of decks and patios, everybody has been wanting to use their outdoor spaces, makes sense. And we wanted to have a little bit of flexibility for the residents and for this, they're using their decks and patios. So we have proposed to allow for decks that encroach into the setbacks. You can now have privacy screens both above and below the decks. So sometimes you want to keep the critters out, put a little lattice work or privacy screen below the deck, or like this image here, sometimes we do see neighbors wanting a little bit of privacy between like a townhouse unit. So we would allow above the deck itself to go up to 8.5 feet in height, and any pergolas or planters, trellises, that kind of thing could be 3 feet deep. And then with decks or patios that are 8 inches or less, so essentially your at-grade decks and patios, they would be permitted to extend into the setbacks.
All right, and then the accessory living units. We know this has been a hot topic during the project because we are proposing some changes. And, the current name is the accessory dwelling unit. And so first off, we've got a new name, accessory living units. This is just to reduce confusion with our acronym ADU for affordable dwelling units. But we are bringing forward a lot of the current standards in today's ordinance. So we are bringing forward that it's only allowed with a single family detached dwelling. You can't have it with a townhouse or a condo. It's limited to 2 bedrooms and 2 people. If you want it to be in a detached structure, you still need a minimum of 2 acres and special permit approval from the BZA. The owner has to live on the property. It can be, the owner can live either in the principal unit or the accessory unit, but must live there. Of course, there needs to be inspection by county personnel. And then it should go without saying, but we want to say it anyway, that they need to meet all building, safety, health, and sanitation requirements. And then to this, we've added a couple new requirements. One is that prior to any administrative approval, if there's a well or septic on site, it would need to be pre-approved by the health department. And then also, we've added some standards, and this actually came from a comment that we received from the Braddock District, that we incorporated language that we also have for short-term lodging that requires there to be a fire extinguisher and interconnected smoke and carbon monoxide detectors. And then for the changes, they do kind of focus on 4 main areas. With regard to process, we have proposed an administrative approval, but only if it's located within the principal dwelling. And so this would be instead of the special permit. And also only if it meets all of the standards. And certain standards could be exceeded, but then only with special permit approval. We have received a lot of feedback on this proposal. We have heard that people are concerned. They want to know when one might be going in next door. They'd like to participate in that public hearing. I will say that our staff support for the administrative permit is founded on the objective nature of the standards. They are things that you can kind of look at on a form and say yes or no, whether they meet it. We looked at approved special permits and we looked at their conditions, and most of the time they just mirror those same objective zoning ordinance requirements. So for those and some other reasons, we do support it, but we have heard that there are concerns. And so we are advertising the option for the special permit to be retained. So this is something that the board will be able to consider through the public hearing process. We've also heard concerns about enforcement. And so a change that we've made that can help with that is we have reduced the initial renewal timeframe from 5 years down to 2 years. And then subsequent renewals could be up to 5 years based on their record of compliance. And the way this helps with enforcement is that prior to the renewal, it's a proactive inspection by our DPD staff. So it's not only if someone calls in a complaint, we do go out and make sure that they're continuing to meet all of the standards. Now, we've also proposed some changes regarding size. Currently, an accessory dwelling unit is limited to 35% of the dwelling. We've recommended to bring that down to 800 square feet or 40%, whichever is less. And then if they wanted to have a larger space, they could get a special permit. We've also included an advertised option that they could use the entire basement if that's where the interior unit is. I will tell you, I'll just explain that when it's done currently, if they are proposing an accessory dwelling unit in the basement and they don't quite, it's a little bit bigger than the 35%, they just kind of gerrymander, you know, what they call the accessory living unit. I mean, that's really the truth of it. They might say, oh, this other space here, this media room, that's a shared space. So it's kind of how it works now. It could work in the future, but, you know, to be honest, if it took up the whole basement, it probably would have no different land use impact. For the detached units, we are recommending a maximum size of 1,200 square feet, and it would still need to meet the zoning ordinance definition of an accessory use, which is subordinate. With regard to occupancy, we have advertised the option to remove the requirement that someone on the property, and it could be in the accessory unit or in the principal unit, but someone needs to be 55 years of age or older, or a person with a disability. Like the administrative permit, this has been a hot topic during our discussions. Some people in favor, some people against. I'll say that in our research and in our consultants' research, and I should have mentioned this earlier, that we have been working on this with our consultant Clarion Associates. We are not aware of any other jurisdictions that currently still have this kind of age or disability limitation. And then the last area is parking. And so we have proposed, and this is based on feedback and concerns that we've been hearing about how this might impact a neighborhood, that if it's an interior unit approved with an administrative permit, then they would need to show that they have one more space than is required for the unit. So the way that works is a single-family detached dwelling is required to have 2 or 3 off-street parking spaces, depending on whether they're located on a public or a private street. And so before they would be able to get that administrative permit, they'd have to show that they have 3 or 4 off-street parking spaces. So that could be like 2 in the garage and 2 in the driveway, that kind of thing, before they could get the administrative permit. And then if they don't meet that and they feel like they have a good argument as to why they shouldn't require it, maybe they're really near a bus stop or something, then they could apply for a special permit. And then for those that go to the BZA for a special permit, there is no particular parking requirement, but the BZA can evaluate the parking needs. And then I've been alluding to them as I went along. We do have several advertised options. So we are advertising the option to either approve the proposed administrative permit for the interior units or to keep the special permit. We have some ranges with regard to size, including that basement option that I mentioned. We've advertised that they could either keep or remove the age or disability requirement as well. And then just to put it all into context, since 1983, we've had 219 accessory dwelling units approved and 17 denied. We've been doing some research on other jurisdictions that have amended their regulations or are maybe maybe they haven't amended them recently, but they're just more lenient than ours. And they are seeing modest numbers of accessory dwelling units or accessory living units. We have some numbers here up on the slide from Arlington County. They amended their regulations in 2018 and again in 2019. And during this time frame, they've seen 32 attached and 38 detached approved. And I'll just note that their regulations are much more lenient than what we are proposing. A lot of folks have asked us about Montgomery County. They had been seeing about 50 per year, and they have not seen any increases this past year, but they think it might be due to COVID. The importance of all this is that we do anticipate modest increases. We don't think it's going to go crazy, but we think there could be modest increases if the board does approve some of these proposed changes. And what this will do for us, it will allow us time to monitor things, to see how it is working in Fairfax County, and to come back and brief the Planning Commission and the board on how things are going, and there could be a consideration of future amendments if that's needed.
So our next topic that has been the center of a lot of discussion is our home-based business use. So in the way the current ordinance is laid out, we have 3 different ways in which you can have a business out of your home. The first is a home occupation, and that is an administratively approved use, and only the home occupations for teaching get customers or clients. So let's say you're teaching Pilates or a language, you would get up to 4 customers at a time and 8 customers in a day currently. The next use we have today is the home professional office. So that limits to certain office professional uses like a doctor's office or an accountant's office. That requires a special permit, which has quite a steep fee of $16,375. And it does have limitations that the Board of Zoning Appeals would impose. So there is a certain number of customers or clients that they would approve with the development conditions, and either 4 employees at a time, or if you have more than 2 acres, 6 employees. The last way currently is the barbershop or beauty parlor in the home, and that's a special permit as well that goes to the Board of Zoning Appeals. And no employees are permitted with this use, but the Board of Zoning Appeals would review, and you can have up to 1 customer at a time. So we have proposed to consolidate this into one home-based business use that would be permitted by administrative permit if certain standards are met, and allow a special permit to exceed certain standards. So currently we have a list of things that aren't allowed, and then we give some examples of what would be allowed. So we've taken a little bit of a different approach, and we've explicitly said what is allowed using our new use table and referencing those uses. So we would propose to allow instructional uses like we do today, including exercise-related uses, office uses, the repair of small household items, so like musical instruments or watches, the barbershop or the hair salon. However, we would not allow for any nail services to occur because there are some concerns with ventilation, no facials, and no massage because there are some licensing prohibitions on massage out of the home. The next one would be sewing or tailoring. And then we have retail or the production of handcrafted items and home-based food production. Both of those uses would be limited to off-site delivery. We want to make sure that the residential areas maintain their stable residential characters, and we didn't want it to turn into, someone coming in and picking up goods and leaving. So you would be required to either deliver those off-site, both the retail goods and the home-crafted goods. Okay. In terms of the standards, we have proposed to reduce some of the standards that we have previously presented to you all. In terms of customers, we've proposed 2 customers at a time in all dwelling unit types and 6 customers in a day. Now, there has been a little bit of confusion on how many home-based businesses and how does this all work out if you have multiple home-based businesses. So these numbers are cumulative over the entirety of the home. So let's say I'm very crafty, which I am not. And let's say I have an Etsy business and I do jewelry making and I knit scarves. So I have 2 different kind of businesses going on. And then my husband is an accountant. So total, we would get 2 customers at a time and 6 in a day. And we'd have to fight over who gets the customers when and where and figure that all out. So it is a cumulative impact. It also includes your short-term lodging guests. So if you have a short-term lodging operation and you're hosting 4 people, you only get 2 customers if you have another business. So we are trying to look at the overall effects on the residential areas. In terms of employees, we have proposed to allow 1 employee in single-family detached dwellings and no employees for other dwelling unit types. For size, we're proposing 400 square feet, and that includes all of your area devoted to the business, any storage, that kind of thing, stock and trade. And then with parking, we have used the same provisions that are related to short-term lodging, and we would require the designation of 1 parking space. Just like with the accessory living units, we have advertised ranges for the board to consider during the public hearing process. So we were ranging for the size, we've advertised from 200 to 750 square feet. In terms of the number of employees, we have included the option to consider allowing 1 employee for all dwelling unit types, not just a single family detached. And in terms of customers, we've proposed the ranges from 0 to 4 at a time and 0 to 8 per day. I'm going to play just a really quick how-to if you all haven't managed to click around in the ordinance yet. This is our zMOD website, and we have all of our different drafts that are posted on here. And I'm going to show you just the November 24th annotated public hearing draft. So if you want to take a look, we do have a cover memo that summarizes all the notable changes in the proposed zoning ordinance from the current zoning ordinance. So if you go and start on page 7, you'll see this kind of diamond shape shows all of the notable changes. And then there's a little, I guess that's a diamond, whatever that little triangle pointing one is. Those are the new changes that have been released in the November draft. So if you're just focused on the latest changes, look for that signal. And then if you go to page 30 of the draft, you'll see the changes in permissions. So this is a table that shows you in every zoning district what the change is, what's the related use, if you're interested in where the permissions are being proposed to change. Then we have two great appendices. One is on page 40, and it really dives into the accessory living units, the background, and explains the standards that are being proposed. We do the same with the home-based business approach on Appendix 4. That's on page 47 of our draft. So same thing, background and the standards are explained. Page 51 includes our table of contents, so you'll see all of our different articles here. These are all hyperlinked, so if you want to navigate through the different articles, if you want to take a look at the use regulations, and you can click through and you can hyperlink and it'll take you straight to the related provisions. So Articles 5 includes your development standards, 6 is parking and loading, 7 is signs, and then Article 8, our favorite acronym, APE, and then your definitions are included in Article 9. So first I'll show you the zoning districts. If you want to click on any of the zoning districts, this is the residential. They all have similar layouts with an aerial, some example images, and then there's that table of the dimensional standards and the keyed graphic that are included in every one of the zoning districts. So we think this will be really helpful for ease of understanding. Article 4, you can go to our use table. Now this includes all of the uses and they're broken out into overarching classifications, underlying categories in the bone color, and then the individual uses are beneath. You'll see the zoning districts located across the top. And I'm going to show you if we wanted to figure out where a kennel was allowed. We'd scroll on down to the commercial use classification, and you can see, all right, if I'm in the C8, a kennel is either permitted or it's by special exception. You can click on the use specific standards, and this tells you how and when and where the kennel is permitted. So you have your standards for all of the uses when it's by right, and then standards when it's a special exception. And then the great thing about this zMOD draft is that all of our uses are now defined. So you'll see here in Article 9, we have a definition now for a kennel. And so that's not something we currently have. So it gives you examples of what that use may be. In terms of our next steps, Carmen alluded it to in the beginning, but if you want to get out your calendars and make some notes, we do have our new draft that I just showed you, as well as the memo and the strike through underline changes posted on our website. We have our public hearing with the Planning Commission this Thursday, and then March 9th would be with the board. So if the board does act at some point in the spring on the zMOD document, we are targeting a delayed effective date, potentially July 1st. That way we can get all of our staff trained, we can get our forms updated, and most excitingly, our new platform will be hosting our zoning ordinance. So currently it's a static PDF. It's not as navigable as we will eventually have it with a new platform that will include interactive search features, hyperlinks, hover boxes, and a lot of really great dynamic search tools. So we're looking forward to that. There are many ways to reach Carmen and I, so feel free to reach out if you have further questions or comments you want to provide us. We have a dedicated DPD zMOD Comments email address that we check every day. We have our Fairfax County Zoning Facebook page, just if you want to keep in the know on social media. This is the link to the zMOD website that had that the PDF that I just went through. You can also Google Fairfax County zMOD and it'll pop right up. And then feel free to give us a call as well. With that, I believe we are ready for some Q&A. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Carmen and Casey. Great job, great presentation. Before we get into the Q&A, I just want to circle back. They highlighted some of the community outreach that has been done throughout this process, and I just want to reiterate the outreach that's gone on in the Braddock district. So 2 surveys have gone out on this topic, first from Supervisor Cook, I think in 2017, and one from me last year. The Braddock Land Use and Environment Committee has had 1, 2, 3 meetings on this topic over the last 3 years, and the Braddock District Council, I know, had a meeting last year as well. All of these are public, have been notified on either emails from Supervisor Cook or from my office over the last year. There have also been several of the county-wide meetings that took place at the main government center, which is in the Braddock District. So it was a good opportunity for Braddock District folks as well. So a lot of work has gone into. I really appreciate the staff and everything that they've done in terms of the outreach. So with that, let's go ahead into the questions, and I'm going to look at the hands, and hopefully I'm doing this in the right order. And my only request, if possible, ask your question or make your comment, and then give us and the staff a chance to answer. If we have too much back and forth, some folks might not get to their question until late this evening. So I think the first person with their hand up is John Bayer. Can we unmute John?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Walkinshaw. I have two quick questions, if I could. My first one is tied to residential green space within HOAs. The question is, some of our members have been reading through the proposals, and there's a concern that the county would be able to direct multi-use or some other types of dwelling onto green space that's in HOA areas. I don't think that's true, but I'm asking for a direct read, and I'll wait on that. And then if I could ask my second one.
Okay, sure. Yeah, Carmen, Casey, I think we can probably answer that pretty quickly, I hope.
Yeah. No, we're not doing that.
Yeah, not going to happen. Not going to happen.
Okay, that's sort of what I figured. And my second question was, as you were going through the slides, I noticed something about food trucks. So our community has had a lot of different events, and there's some great little opportunities to, just as a entrepreneurial thing, where you can invite food trucks to your community events with your association or your homeowners group. I thought I read something that said we would need a permit in our community if we had an event and then we invited trucks to come in and they were only there for that day and then left. Did I read that right? I just wanted to clarify what I thought I saw quickly on the slide.
Yeah, John, you're correct. You actually, well, currently you need you can get what's called a temporary special permit currently. We're renaming that to special event. So you can have food trucks in association with that that special event, or like I said, currently you'll hear people call it a TSP. But in order to have a food truck like at your community pool or something like that, just on a regular basis, you're actually not allowed to do that right now. But we have heard that people would like to be able to have food trucks at those like non-residential uses in the residential districts. So this is like a private school, community pool, community center, those kinds of places. And the way you have to do it now is you need to amend, though all of those uses are approved like by a special permit or maybe a special exception. So in order, you would have to amend that approval to include the allowance for the food trucks. And that is quite a process, as you probably know. So we've included the option that they could have up to 12 times a year approved with the administrative permit. And then they're still subject, as Casey said, to the other restrictions for food trucks. Like they're only allowed to be there, including set up and take down for 4 hours. You can only have 3 trucks. And we think it's important to keep a balance because while we recognize the interest in having food trucks, we also sometimes hear about people complaining that there's too much and they're just kind of noisy and they don't want them. So we need a balance, and we thought that, 12 is a good number. We borrowed it from, another place in the zoning ordinance, but for instance, it would get your pool. You could have it maybe once a week over the summer months, and then that's it.
Yeah, so
okay,
essentially, John,
that's helpful.
Some neighborhoods have been doing that. They probably have not been technically in compliance. So I think this acknowledges that reality and creates a structure to allow neighborhoods to do it, but with some limits. Any other questions, John?
No, that was exactly what happened in my case. I didn't know we needed a permit, and we did it for one of our association events. I'm the president, and so I wanted to make sure I was in compliance. So thank you both. I appreciate it.
You're not the only one that did that. That's all right. Okay, let's go to I see it's Mike Farrell and Jean Cadet. I'm not sure if it's which one of you it is or both of you. Mike or Jean? You're unmuted on our end, so Is your microphone on your computer? There we go. Now we see you, but we can't hear you. There. Okay. Well,
maybe we'll come back to him.
Yeah, we'll come back. We'll come back to Mike and Gene. It looks like y'all are having some microphone problems. I see Siki's hand is up next.
Yeah, hi. I have two questions regarding the use. One is in R2, which is my house located. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Siki. Sorry.
When's the R2? I noticed that in the by right use, and it has a group living. Anything other than a single family is kind of make people nervous. It's group living. And also another question is in C6 zone, which is a Twin Brook Shopping Center is located. In the by right use, it has an indoor shooting range. I'm wondering why this not be listed as like a special permit or special exceptions, which requires more public feedback, and it becomes by right use. That's my concern. I hang up on this.
Thank you, Siki. Two good questions there: group homes and indoor shooting ranges.
Sure. So we have not proposed any changes to the group home use. That's something that the state regulates, and it does permit under certain licensed operations, it permits a certain number up to 8 individuals to reside in a dwelling together. So we do get common requests for that. I saw Leslie raise her hand because it's a topic that we do have a lot of conversations about.
Frank, I'm sorry. Frank, can we unmute Leslie? She should be just unmuted in case she wants to weigh in on anything. Leslie, you're unmuted, so anytime you want to jump in, feel free.
Right, and I think that what the gentleman was talking about, can you hear me?
Yes.
We can hear
you,
yep.
Was the group living category. And the group living category includes, and Casey, correct me, I don't have it in front of me, a number of uses that are already permitted in residential districts under today's ordinance. That would include the group residential facilities, which are by right, because they're treated like, if you have through the state code, if you have 8 or fewer older adults or folks with intellectual disabilities, if they're licensed by the state and they have 8 or fewer, they operate just like any other residential dwelling. The other group living would be, there's currently a special permit under today's ordinance that would allow somebody to exceed the 4-person limitation on occupancy by unrelated folks. And, that's here today, and we're carrying that forward, and it would still require a public hearing process. Same thing with like congregate living, which are different types of group living. So we're not really changing that. They're the same permissions that they have been from the previous ordinance. We've just kind of changed the category, and we're calling it group living, and kind of capturing those uses within that category. Carmen, Casey, did I get it right?
So the group residential facility is in the household living. There are a couple of similar names with these different uses, but I believe the group residential is the one that's permitted in the R2, whereas the group household, slightly different, is a special permit under the group living category. So I'm not sure if that answered the question in terms of if you're looking for guidance on the group residential facility, if you're looking for questions on the group household use.
I think he was probably asking about group residential facilities. I'm like, and the important thing that Leslie said there is those type of group homes are regulated by state and I think federal law, and they're by right, which means that the county cannot prevent them from being built, even if we wanted to. I don't think we want to. I think folks who are living in those kind of homes deserve to live in the same neighborhoods as the rest of us. But even if we wanted to prevent them, we aren't allowed to by state and I think federal law. And anyone can correct me if I'm wrong on that. And Siki had what was his second question?
The second question.
C6 though.
Oh.
C shooting range. Yeah,
Yeah,
shooting range. Okay.
Yes, so that's part of a consolidation. So we currently have a use in our ordinance that's indoor firing ranges, archery ranges, or other similar indoor commercial recreation. So that's historically been used kind of as a catch-all for our indoor commercial uses, like our cat lounge. We had previously interpreted the cat lounge to be most similar to an indoor archery firing range, despite, common sense maybe seeing difference between those two uses. So we have, as a part of our consolidation, we have a new just overarching indoor commercial recreation use. So we've permitted that in the commercial districts, and we've expanded the permissions for certain permutations of that use. So there are some good, if you're interested, if you look at I believe it's in our cover memo, we do finally lay out what the changes are to each of the individual uses, because that was a consolidation of about 10 different finely grained uses like movie theaters and just amusement devices. So it's a bit of a, there's some resulting permission changes that did occur there. We have added, I will say, a standard for these shooting ranges that's not in our current ordinance in terms of soundproofing. So that is a standard that you'll see in our use-specific standards for the indoor commercial recreation use.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask that question because Siki raised the prospect of the Twin Brook Shopping Center, and like a lot of our smaller shopping centers, it is surrounded by neighborhoods. I mean, there are people's homes just maybe 100 or 200 yards away. So obviously there would be some concerns about a shooting range. So the soundproofing provisions would be important in that case. So there are a couple of questions that I can read out in the chat, but first let's see if we can go back to Mike and Jean and see if they have their audio working. Can we unmute Mike and Jean?
They will have to unmute themselves for some reason.
There we go, Mike. We got you. We hear you.
Okay. All right. You can hear us? Okay. I just had okay, good. I have a few questions. On the I'm concerned about more street parking, and so even though with the accessory living unit and with the home base business, there's a requirement to park on driveways and to have a space available. I mean, what's to stop the people who live there from taking their 2 or whatever number of cars and putting those on the street? I mean, it seems like it's just a matter of shuffling some cars around to accommodate the requirement. That's one question. The other is, I thought I read somewhere that for home-based businesses, they can put signs up now somewhere on the property to indicate that there's a business there. So I have concerns about that. And if there's a hair salon, what kind of requirements are there for not, putting chemicals down into the water system if they're coloring hair or whatever, things like that. And then the other thing is, even though, and I think you've done a great job, certainly coming to the land use committee many times and having these online meetings now with COVID, but I can tell you from my own personal experience that most people do not have a clue that this is happening. You're not reaching a very wide range of people. And even tonight, there's about 40 people, but I think about, at least a third of the people here are people who are either involved with this directly or are on the land use committee and already, heard some of this stuff. So I think people are going to be very surprised that this is happening, because I think most people aren't aware of it. That's my comment. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Jean. So we had a couple of questions there. First on parking, I'll let Carmen and Casey go through the details, but I can tell you that this is an issue that I know other board members heard when some of the earlier iterations of this proposal came out, and the last time we discussed zMOD at the meeting of our land use committee, It was a topic that I and other board members asked us to emphasize and go back to the drawing board and see what additional protections could be made to prevent additional on-street parking. And Carmen and Casey can probably explain what that is.
Yes, those were all excellent questions, and I'm glad you asked them because they are questions that we're receiving and hearing in some different emails and letters. So it's good to go through them. As to the parking, Supervisor Walkinshaw is exactly correct. This really has been the focus of some discussion at the Land Use Policy Committee. And so we went back and we actually revised the accessory living unit standards before we had used the designated language, and we changed it to require that you need to show the space, and that cannot be off street. So before an administrative permit could be approved, they would need to show that they have on their property the required number of spaces, whether it be 3 or 4. So like I said, that would be in your garage, in your driveway, but you can't count on-street parking. That wouldn't count. And even for a designated space, we're not going to let you say, oh, I'm designated that space in front of my house on the street. That doesn't count. It needs to be one that you can control. So for instance, even if you are in a if you're in a townhouse and you have a visitor pass that you can ensure that you can use, that would count. We do this review with home child cares currently, where we are looking at where's the parking going to be. So that's how we've responded to the parking with the ALUs, to add an actual off-street parking space requirement, but that only applies with the administrative permit. If it's the special permit, it would continue with the evaluation by the BZA as it is today. So I think that was number 1. Number 2, on the signage, also a very good question. And I know it might seem confusing, but it's actually not a change from today, not from the practicality of today. So the current sign provisions in the zoning ordinance do allow for a residence to have what we call minor signs. So these are your yard signs, what you typically see, people put out. They want to support a candidate, or their kid just graduated from high school, or whatever they want to put. So you can have these signs. They can only be they're not permanent signs. They're just like the little, yard signs, and they can be at most 2 by 2. They can only be like 4 square feet each, and a total of 12 square feet. So that means, you can have at most 3 of these small signs, and you're allowed to have them, as I said, today, but we can't regulate the content. So therefore, it can say whatever you want it to say, which means even though the zoning ordinance currently does say for a home occupation, no signage is allowed, as a practical matter, we can't, if you put, Leslie's daycare or whatever, you can't, we couldn't say, oh, that says Leslie's daycare, you're not allowed to have that. We wouldn't be allowed to do that. So it's really not a change, but what we have included is language with the home-based business use that clarifies that all you get with a home-based business is these minor signs, the yard signs. So they can never make a case for more. They can't ask the BZA for more. You get nothing more, and that's it. So that was really the background on that. And I know we've heard a lot of concern, but I hope that helps. The hair chemicals, this is something that we are also concerned about, and we did check into it. We checked with the health department on this, and in the quantities that it would be occurring, remember, this is still an accessory use to a residence. You're not going to have more than 6 customers in a day. They said that those amounts would be okay. So, and then as far as outreach, I am sorry that you feel that way. We have tried our very best to get the word out in every which way possible. I actually think that while I personally would rather be in a room with you all, how many people do we have? We have a lot. I don't know if we ever got, I'm gonna look here. It says we have 40 people. Yeah, I don't think we ever got 40 people in any of our in-person meetings. So the virtual meetings have had it's a mixed blessing, and I appreciate you all being here tonight. And that's all I know to say about that. And hopefully I touched on all of your questions.
Thank you, Carmen. Yeah, you know, I can certainly understand the frustration in terms of, you know, the challenge of getting a significant number of the 1.1 million people in Fairfax County to pay attention to these issues. You know, I feel like local government issues are the most important and have the most impact on people's daily lives. But the reality is, you know, people tend to focus more on the maybe sexier national political topics than this. And I can just tell you, as Carmen noted, we have about 40 people on here tonight. You know, we have 15,000 people who are on our Braddock District email list, all of whom got the notice about this meeting multiple times. You know, we've also posted it on Nextdoor and Facebook and all the avenues that we have. And, you know, it's a challenge to get people to focus. But I think the key, it's not really the raw number of people that participate in the process. The key is the quality of the input that we receive, and do we incorporate that input? And I think if you look at this process, including the parking issue we just discussed, you all, those who have taken the time to participate and read page after page after page of these documents, have provided some really key and critical input that the staff has incorporated. So I think that is really the goal of the outreach. I would love to have all 125,000 of the 125,000 people I represent on the meeting tonight. But what's more important to me is that we get feedback from folks like you who are paying attention and are want to contribute in a meaningful way to this. So as a reminder, if you have questions, you can raise your hand still. I'm going to go into some of the questions that have come in through the chat, and I will start with the first. Bill Barfield says, hey, Carmen and Casey, are you aware of the groundswell of citizen and communities' concerns and complaints about several specific additions and rewordings to the latest zMOD? So the question is, are you aware of the groundswell of concerns about several specific additions and rewordings?
So I'm not sure exactly which the latest is referring to. We did, as Carmen mentioned, we released a memo with pretty limited technical changes. There was some changes that we highlighted to flags and flagpoles, but most of the others were, you know, making complete sentences. We're making sure, you know, to take out some, you know, outdated language that we missed during our review. So we haven't heard anything specifically about that latest memo. You know, we obviously have heard concerns from people on all sides of the spectrum, of especially the accessory living units and the home-based businesses, which is why we have included advertised ranges for, you know, we can hear we'll let the Planning Commission and the board hear the public testimony and to make their recommendations after hearing the input received.
Okay, next, Bradley Sutton asks, can you address changes to carports allowed within setbacks, as well as height, size, and setback changes to accessory structures such as sheds and detached garages?
Sure. So carports are currently, if they're completely open, so you can't have the typical storage area in the back. It has to be completely open, except for where it's attached to the house. They are currently allowed to extend 5 feet, but no closer than 5 feet to the side lot line. And this is something that is apparently, you probably have observed this yourselves, been an invitation to a future notice of violation, because many people down the road, they started out with a carport and now they actually want a garage or a living room. And now it's no longer allowed to extend. So it's not allowed to be where it is. And I think, you know, sometimes just people didn't know that, you know, they bought a house with a carport in a certain location, and then they decide, oh, you know what, I'd rather have this enclosed space. And they didn't realize that now they're creating a violation for themselves. So we actually, for going forward, of course, this doesn't affect if you have an open carport, it can just stay like it is. But going forward, new carports, which probably not very many people are building new carports anyway, but if they do, they would no longer be allowed to extend into that side setback. It would need to meet the setbacks for that principal structure of the house. And then if they do decide later on to enclose it, there will be no setback issue with that. So that is a proposed change. I can't remember right off who suggested it, but that was something that was suggested during the course of our project.
And Carmen, this is Leslie. I would just also add that there is a provision currently in the ordinance that would allow, if you had a carport and you wanted to enclose it and it didn't meet the setbacks, there is a process now that you can get a special permit to allow for that extension, as long as you don't exceed 50% of what you would be entitled to. So, that's kind of what happens when there's a notice of violation. The remedy is to go through the special permit process. So that avenue is available for folks.
And then I guess I was looking for the comment on something. Was it about the accessory structures, I believe?
Yeah, such as sheds and detached height, size, and setback changes to accessory structures such as sheds and detached garages. Okay,
sure. Yeah. So we have proposed a little bit of an intermediate step here. Currently, your sheds are allowed to be up to 8.5 feet in height, to be located anywhere in your side or rear of your yard. And then other accessory structures like a swing set or something could be up to 7 feet in height. And we have consolidated those two different categories. So sheds would no longer be treated separately. They would be the same. And we've carried forward that same standard for the sheds, the 8.5 feet in height. It can be anywhere in your side or rear yard. And then this is where we've introduced a proposed change. If it's up to, and we've recommended up to 12 feet, but we have advertised the range between 10 and 12 feet for the board to consider. Then it could be as close as 5 feet to your side or rear lot line. And then over that height, it would be back to the same approach we take today for the taller ones. And that would mean it couldn't be closer to the side lot line than a distance equal to the side setback. And it would have to be set back from the rear lot line a distance equal to its height. And so this proposed change is based on a number of things. It's based on a review of existing structures and what's available out there for purchase. When the 8.5 feet in height was first put into the zoning ordinance, it was based on, they went to Heckinger's back in the day, and this is what was available. Well, we did our own shopping, and if you go to Home Depot or Lowe's, I'll note that Lowe's has a little better selection. But anyway, they're taller, and up to 12 feet, you'll be able to get a nice shed. And we do measure accessory structures to the very top. So it's the highest point to the lowest point on the adjacent grade, unlike the way you might, if measure a house, the height is measured differently. So anyway, it's based on the height of structures that are out there today. If you want to build one using dimensional lumber plus a roof, it'll work for that. It's based on the fact that our DCC staff, this is what they see out there in the field. This is what people are putting in their yards. They're putting a taller shed in the corner. And we also did review, I think it was Casey, you did this, about 20 of the last error special permits. And this would take care of most of them. So this is kind of a reality check of this is what people are building and this is what people want to build for their accessory structures.
Okay, next question from the chat here. We have a couple of questions from Nell Hurley. Welcome, Nell, former Braddock District Planning Commissioner. Thank you for your service. In some cases, your new terms are not more plain language, but rather the opposite. Example, your FAQs state the term grandfathering provisions has been replaced with a more easily understood and descriptive reference of provisions relating to previous approvals. So some feature in your house will no longer be grandfathered. It will instead be something covered by a quote provision relating to previous approval. How is this more easily understood and descriptive? I could take a crack at that, and I certainly, when I first saw this, I agreed with you, Nell, because grandfathering, it's a term that I certainly understand. I think I would suggest, though, that for those for whom English is not their first language, those kind of phrases like grandfathering, which is kind of a colloquialism, very difficult for someone to understand. As someone who has spent 38 years trying to graduate beyond intermediate Spanish, those kind of phrases which don't directly translate are very challenging. So it might be that part of the process of updating the ordinance was to try to use, even though it does sound a bit more complex, certainly be easier for someone for whom English is not their first language. I'll go to the next one, and the staff can correct me if I totally got that wrong. Nell also asks, your staff Q&As state, quote, a maximum of 2 people may live in an ALU, and the space is limited to no more than 2 bedrooms. What happens if a couple has a baby? Are they evicted? Is that even legal? How would the county fairly count regular overnight guests like, quote, significant others or children regularly visiting a parent in a divorce situation? And before I turn it over, I'll just, the issue, this comes up periodically, if one of the folks living in an ALU has a baby, would they be evicted? And my understanding is those situations are governed by federal fair housing laws. And now you'll probably remember this came up in the context of one university, which for those who aren't familiar with it is an affordable and student housing development near George Mason University. And one of the questions that neighbors there asked is, what happened? You're saying that this student housing won't, add kids to the school system. What happens if one of the students has a baby while living in the facility? Would you throw them out? And the answer is no, of course, under federal law. You can't do that, but it is exceedingly rare and rarely happens, and I suspect it would be the same in this situation. But I'll turn it over to the staff for if there's anything to add there. Overnight guests and significant others and children regularly visiting a parent in a divorce situation.
Sure. So we'll start with the grandfathering as well. So this was actually something that was raised by the Planning Commission. There is a racial history of the term grandfathering. While maybe has come to be colloquial, there is some issue with that term. So we wanted to we wanted to say it like it is. It's the provisions that relate to the previous approval. So that is one of the background reasons for the change in terms. In terms of the number of people and if a couple has a baby, like Supervisor Walkinshaw says, we are subject to the Fair Housing Act. So while a owner could enforce the 2 occupant limitation of their accessory living unit, our zoning ordinance is subject to the Fair Housing Act. So we would look at it as on a case-by-case basis for reasonable accommodations. I will say that this is something that we have today. We have a 2-person occupancy on our accessory dwelling units. We have a 2-person roomer and boarder occupancy, and we have a 4-person unrelated in terms of our occupancy limitations. So it's not a new standard we're adding. This is not a new issue that would be arising, but we would deal with that on a case-by-case reasonable accommodation basis.
Okay, I'm going to jump back to the raised hands, and we're now getting into, we have a couple folks have their hand or have a second question. I'm going to try to give everyone an opportunity to ask one question before we go into any round 2s. So next, Donna Caruso. Can we unmute Donna?
Yes.
Go ahead, Donna.
I have a follow-up question to the sign issue. You said that they are allowed to have a certain size signs. Can the homeowners association say that they cannot have a permanent sign? Can we limit the amount of time that they can have the sign up?
This is Leslie Johnson. Our zoning ordinance doesn't, if you all have covenants that say you can't have signage, then those covenants would stand. We wouldn't, if your HOA docs are silent, then then it would be the zoning ordinance. And it doesn't preclude you from crafting new HOA rules to govern that. So, so yes, I mean, your HOA could take action to limit, signage and what have you. And again, this is, it's a difficult issue. We struggle with this a lot, even when we were doing the yard sign provisions, because again, there was a Supreme Court decision, that we can't regulate content as far as signage. So when you start taking that lens off, it makes it more difficult to come up with regulations. So the way we regulate it is time, place, and manner, which means, how long you have it up, the size of it. And so when we were taking the revised revisions and the update to the sign ordinance back in 2019 through to the board, I mean, that was one of the things that we did focus on. And that was one of the areas of our sign ordinance that was basically not content neutral, because we were regulating the signs based on the content and saying you could have up to 32 square feet for a political campaign sign, but you could only have X amount of square feet for another type of sign. So that's why we consolidated it, and we went on the side of a smaller size of total of 12 square feet, but no one sign can exceed 4 square feet. So, and we also talked about offsite signage, and there was concerns about advertising open house signs on private property for the realtors. So we did allow for some of that during a 3-day period on the weekends to allow for that. So it's not an easy issue, and I certainly can appreciate the concerns. It hasn't been, I'll be honest with you, we approve home occupations right now by right all over the place. It hasn't, from a complaint standpoint, we haven't seen signage as an issue. Again, now we're having to make changes, so it's now, becoming public, and, we'll have to wait and see what happens. But I really, I don't believe we're going to see a plethora of all these signs popping up. I've seen a lot of signs, more of the signs I've seen in the last, 10 months because of the COVID has been for kids who are graduating from, high school, and there was no graduation. And so they posted their signs out there. So, and, and there've been some COVID signs, we're thinking about you, and all of those kinds of things. So, again, I do appreciate the concerns that this, could, create more signage, but we're really trying to be very careful and balanced in our approach.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Donna. Next, let's go to Jeff. I apologize, Jeff, I don't have your last name here, but if we can unmute Jeff. Go ahead, Jeff.
Hello. Hello, can you hear me?
Hello, we hear you, yes.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah, no, I appreciate the opportunity to speak here. I haven't been to one of these meetings before, and I think it's pretty clear that the zoning ordinance is in need of a refresh. The current one is impenetrable. So I appreciate all the good work that's gone into it. And I just have a couple comments on the ALU and the home-based business portions. And one of the comments is sort of alluded to by the last question, which is my understanding is that HOAs can make rules that might, sort of restrict home-based businesses or the ALUs and sort of the expansion that might happen under the zMOD. I live in a community that is not an HOA. And so I think it's right, which one of the folks mentioned, that, we're probably not going to see 5,000 petitions or requests for an ALUs in a year or two. So there probably won't be a flood, but my concern is that over time, these changes could sort of channel development into the non-HOA communities. And so you sort of wind up having two Fairfaxes, which I don't think anyone wants. And, it doesn't really matter maybe until it's next door to you. And so that's sort of a concern I have. And I hope that a guiding principle as this moves forward to approval, which I'm sure will be approved in some way, is, would the planning commissioners, would the supervisors, would they be comfortable? Would they want an ALU or a home-based business as described in these regulations as currently drafted next door? And maybe the answer is yes. But, I think that's something that should be considered. And maybe there are ways to sort of modify the ALUs and the home-based business regs further. Like the home-based business, for example, right now as it reads, your home-based business can operate 365 days a year, get up to 8 customers as advertised a day. That strikes me as a lot. That's one end of the spectrum, but that strikes me as a lot of customers for a residential area, especially if it's next door to you. And with the ALUs, maybe there's a middle of the road solution. Maybe you shift to the admin permits, but you keep the 55 plus and disabled category requirement, or maybe you remove those requirements, but you keep the special permit so that there can still be a voice for people in the neighborhood at the special permit stage. So I appreciate you hearing me out, and it's a big undertaking. So I thank you for your work on this.
Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, and on the ALUs, I think one thing that's important, because we've made some comparisons tonight to some other jurisdictions, and the number of ALUs that they've had as a result of changes, some other jurisdictions in the region and across the country that have been in the news. Even what is proposed here, assuming that we were to adopt precisely what's in front of us tonight, is significantly more restrictive than what others in the region have done. So it's much more restrictive than Arlington. It's much more restrictive than Montgomery County. It's much more restrictive to some other jurisdictions around the country that have gotten a lot of attention on this issue, like Minneapolis and others. So if you're looking for a middle ground on the issue of accessory living units, I would submit that what's in front of us is a middle ground, kind of between, a real liberalization or opening up of ALUs and what we have now, where there are effectively none because the process is so onerous or restrictive. So, but I appreciate your comments. Let's go to Nell. I'm going to skip you and come back because we have Kevin Morse and he hasn't had a chance yet. So, Kev, let's unmute Kevin. Go ahead, Kevin.
Thank you. One quick comment on outreach. I really, appreciate the challenge that you have there as a condominium president who just tries to get people not to put cardboard out on trash day. I don't underestimate what you have in front of you. And in fact, I think Leslie appeared before the Transportation Advisory Commission a couple of years ago to let us know what was coming down the road. So again, I appreciate the efforts you all have been doing on this. And in fact, Leslie, I think just answered one of my questions about the this does not override more restrictive covenants in a condominium association. So that just leaves me, and I may have missed this early on, but with the ALUs, one, what prevents a B&B operation or a Airbnb? And then two, kind of following up on the last comment, could you apply for an ALU strictly to start a home business?
So I might have to ask for some clarification on the last part, but for the short-term lodging, it's not allowed. You're not allowed to have short-term lodging in an accessory dwelling unit currently, and we've brought that forward. Okay. And the overlap, and we have tried to think about this along the way of, this layering of things that are happening in a neighborhood. So we did include the short-term lodging guests in the cumulative maximum daily count for home-based business customers. So that's where you may have heard we said if you have short-term lodging guests, but you have a home business, you have to count those towards your customers. So you may use up your 6 customers in a day if you max out your short-term lodging guests. But for the ALUs, yeah, they can't be using that. I think I need you to explain your follow-up question though.
If you were to build an ALU solely for the purpose of, opening a barber shop or something, albeit limited to 6 people a day, you're allowed to do that?
Well, so the ALU is, what it is it's an independent space that has the components of your eating, your sleeping, your sanitation, and your living. So it's got all those components of a dwelling. What it really boils down to, I'll say, is the kitchen, because you can have your 2 roomers or boarders by right with a family anyway, but be that as it may. So if you wanted to put an addition on your house or, use your basement for your home-based business, you can do that anyway. You might, you have to observe, the setbacks in the building code and so forth, but you can do that. Now, if you wanted to have a detached structure for an ALU, for someone to live there, you need a minimum of 2 acres and the special permit approval from the BZA. Now, let's say you want to build a detached structure and you want to use it for a home-based business. You might be able to do that as well. You need to meet, location requirements, and it needs to, meet the definition of accessory, and we've got some other standards on accessory structures, but you don't really need to disguise a home business space as an ALU. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I just, when you had the, 55 or older, I think that kind of precluded that, and this opens it up a little more, but you also make the point you can open a home business in the structure that you have now too. So no, you've answered the question, so thank you.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. So Nell, you had some questions in the chat and have your hand up. So maybe if we unmute you, we can cover both bases there.
Okay, well, a lot of you already know me. As our supervisor already mentioned, I used to be the planning commissioner, and Mary Cortina has been an excellent replacement for me. I out here in Prescott, Arizona, I came out here, well, shortly after Mary replaced me, and then the virus hit, and I haven't really been able to get back there. So here I am calling you from Prescott, Arizona. I've been trying to keep up with things, but that's gets actually to the point of my question, is that I know staff has been trying really hard to hold all these meetings, et cetera, but we haven't had that community gathering, that the PTA meetings, the pool meetings, the chit chats at barbecues and all that kind of stuff, which is how most of the community get to know each other and communicate what's going on. So I guess my overall question is, what's the rush? I'll back that up with saying that along with James Migliaccio as a planning commissioner, I was one of the points of contact for staff. Hello, Leslie and Carmen, etc. And as I'm very familiar with zMOD, I've been familiar with it from the beginning, from the very as they were first trying to find the people that are actually doing the work, but that's, so it's been going on for years and years. And what's the rush that we have to do this now? Why can't we allow more time, wait until after the pandemic? It's not the most essential business. Yes, let's get the schools open, et cetera, et cetera. But why do we have to do this now before we can allow more community interaction?
Hi, Nell, it's Leslie.
Well, yeah, go ahead, Leslie.
Well, I didn't know, Supervisor Walkinshaw, if you wanted to take the first crack at that, or if you wanted me to do it.
Yeah, I think I appreciate that now. I guess, I would say a couple things. As you noted, it has been years and years, and most of the public outreach on this took place pre-pandemic. So people did have a lot of those opportunities. Now, obviously, there have been changes to the draft since then. And I can just tell you based on my experience, and as you know, I attended many of Supervisor Cook's meetings on land use and other topics long before I was elected. Quite frankly, the participation that we have had, not just on this issue, but on issues across the board during COVID has been significantly higher. So the kind of meetings where we would normally get 10 people, we're getting 30 people. The kind of meetings where we would normally get 30 people, we're getting 60 to 100 people. I think because, you know, for a segment of the community, you know, especially maybe those who, you know, who are working or, you know, have kids that need dinner and have homework to do, it's a lot easier to participate in a virtual meeting like this than an in-person meeting. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't get back to doing in-person meetings. I'm very much looking forward to that. But I actually think we've had more community involvement because of the pandemic than we otherwise would have, which is not something I would have predicted. It has surprised me. But that has been my observation going through this process and some others. I don't know if there's anything you want to add, Leslie.
Well, I would just add that, you know, Nell's correct. And we started this, you know, we've been talking about a new ordinance, you know, starting in 2016. And, you know, it took us a while to get moving. They had to drag me kicking and screaming because it's been a yeoman's task. It's a lot. But our ordinance is, as one gentleman mentioned, it's a lot to slog through. It's over 40 years old, 1978. And it really is time. I think Fairfax deserves better. And I think the online platform that we're looking at is going to be great. And we're really coming into the 21st, finally coming into the 21st century. And I think we've taken it step by step, rolled out drafts. And so it's time. We need to keep moving. Need to keep moving forward because things are going to keep changing on us. So it's, you know, we know that things are, even with the pandemic, things are changing so quickly that, you know, what we adopt today, you know, could be outdated in some areas in a year. And so we don't want to get ourselves in a position where, you know, we wait another 40 years or what have you. We want this to be a living, breathing document. You know, we've told the board that we want to continuously come back to them, identify issues through our work program and other areas where we can say, hey, we need to relook at this because things are changing, or we're seeing, you know, issues coming up with citizens or staff, and staff is having a hard time. So, you know, we want to be able to come back every, you know, couple of years and saying, here are some, you know, things that we need to do differently. So, I mean, that's kind of my philosophy on it.
I also would say, you know, through the pandemic, you know, the county and the board have dealt with a number of controversial issues that we've had to deal with, you know, issues surrounding police reform and the police department, you know, our ordinance banning guns from public buildings and parks. And for those issues, we had hundreds and hundreds, thousands of, you know, citizens contacting us and involved in the process on both sides. You know, folks who agreed with what we did and folks who didn't. So people have been able to organize themselves during the pandemic and, you know, make their voice heard on those processes and these. We have a few more questions in the chat, and we'll try to wrap it up here because you know, I don't want to keep folks for too long. Bradley Sutton says, and I hope I haven't asked this already, 8.5 feet is extremely limiting for a garage. If I'm no longer able to build a carport, having a structure of suitable height for a garage that could be placed to a boundary would be a good compromise. How did we come to the 8.5 foot limit for the garage height?
So the 8.5 feet in height is currently the limitation for the accessory storage structures. So for your sheds, where the detached freestanding accessory structures for your garages is 7 feet. So as Carmen outlined, we have merged those two. So it'd be 8.5 feet in height. If he's speaking of a detached garage, it would be able to be located in the side or rear of the lot if it's 8.5 feet in height or lower. Now that is probably not very practical to have a garage that short, so let's assume that it's 10 feet in height. Now with our intermediate step that Carmen described, it would be permitted if the board adopts up to 10 feet in height. It would be permitted to be set back 5 feet from the side and 5 feet from the rear. So that gives a little bit more flexibility than having to meet the entire side yard setback and its distance and height from the rear. So
I would also note that this is Leslie Johnson, that we have also looked at the height, and we've put a maximum limit on the height of an accessory structure. We've had a lot of issues and complaints from homeowners who somebody wants to put up a 24-foot, 25-foot addition, and it's, you know, almost the same size as their principal structure, and it almost, the bulk of it makes it look like two, even if it's a garage, makes it look like two principal structures. So we decided that we should have at least a maximum height limit for those. And then if they want to exceed that height, then it would go to a special permit so that there would be, you know, public hearing and neighbors could you know, comment on it. So as far as that's concerned, it's still the actual setback requirements, other than what Casey mentioned, haven't changed. It's still measured based on the height from the rear, and it's still, you know, based on the height, you know, from the side, but we're kind of up in the height for some of these smaller accessory structures to allow them to be closer to the side lot line. But if it's a garage, you know, nobody has an 8-foot tall garage. I mean, you're looking at probably 16 feet at the max if you want a pitched roof. So that would always, and still would have to be meet the side yard setback, which, you know, probably in a lot of the Braddock district, you know, a lot of your zoning is R2 and R3, which would be R2 is 15 feet, R3 is 12 feet, and then R4 is 10 feet. So I hope that kind of answers a little bit more.
Okay. Thank you, Leslie. Philip Latassa asks, not that I can understand zMOD, but many informed citizens have expressed misgivings about reduced public input. Will opportunities for public input be curtailed to the detriment of natural resources? Is this part of a larger movement, the Gartner Report, et cetera, that intended or not will favor development over citizen interests? You know, I'll just say from my perspective, absolutely not. You know, in our office in the Braddock district, we do everything possible to hear as much citizen and public input as possible. And, you know, when developers come to us who are interested in developing in the Braddock district, the first thing we tell them is, you know, they've got to work to build community support and work directly with the neighborhoods in the community where they hope to build. So that is my perspective from the Braddock district. Leslie, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that.
I think people have raised the Gartner Report, which was a consultant report that the county had done in basically 2015 to talk about processes and how we could, you know, streamline processes, not just for, you know, for everybody, for homeowners, for citizens, for developers. It was just, you know, a holistic look at our land development processes. And that's where, you know, the first kind of push to look at our development codes, the PFM, which has recently been updated, you know, and the zoning ordinance came from. And so, but it wasn't to, you know, meet the needs of developers. It was to look at, you know, how we can, you know, use best practices and make it so that even a homeowner, you know, it doesn't take you, you know, 8 months to get a project through. So that was, you know, what we were really looking at and what the Gartner Report was kind of dealing with. And I think, unfortunately, there's been some misinformation that has been circulating about that whole situation. And so it's kind of unfortunate, but, you know, be that as it may, that's kind of my take on it.
I'd like to maybe add. I'm sorry.
Sure. Real quick, Carmen. Yep.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that we do have a table in the executive summary that lists all the changes in permissions. And this has not been a project where we've gone and changed a lot of things from a public hearing process to an administrative process. It's just not true. Certainly, the accessory living unit has captured a lot of attention, and that, we do have the proposal for the interior accessory living units to have an administrative permit. But otherwise, it's really not true. And I hope, if you have concerns about the permissions of any particular use, we're happy to go over those and discuss them.
Okay, Nell has a good question here, something that I do think about a lot. Is the county discussing the phenomenon that along with empty offices, because many people working remotely want to continue to do so, many people are moving away from close-in suburbs, which means a likely reduction from the numbers of additional housing needed in Fairfax that was previously forecast? I think I would say, now, at least so far, we've seen the opposite in Fairfax County over the last year. Huge numbers of people who maybe were living in DC or other more urban areas wanting to buy homes, larger homes with a little bit more space. Here in Fairfax, as such, we've seen a double-digit increase in home sales and property values. So far, the opposite is happening. The demand is skyrocketing to live in Fairfax County, which is good news, but also presents a lot of challenges. Let me skip down. George Becerra says that one of the presenters mentioned they incorporated a citizen advisory committee. Can they elaborate who was on it, what groups, what Braddock District folks, how diverse was the committee? Anything, Casey, you can share with us on the Citizen Advisory Committee?
Sure. So each of the board members made a recommendation. So we had a member from each of the different magisterial districts, as well as a representative from the Federation of Citizen Associations, Fairfax County Federation. So our very own Carrie Adams, who's here tonight, is the Braddock District representative. So he was really great and made sure to get information to and from the Braddock citizens and to us and back. So they've been a great group.
Thank you. Thank you, Carrie. I'll just read the last few comments from the chat, and then I'll go back to wrap it up with the hands that are raised. Bradley Sutton, I think referring back to the garage conversation, said correct, 10 or even 12 would be ideal, with a 5-foot setback would be great. John Baer says the 12-foot limit is good and would hope supervisors support. The ALU at 55 plus in disability will limit the issues on these pending special permit reviews. Again, would hope the supervisors would not support removing the 55 plus and disabled portions. And final comment, Bradley Sutton, 12 feet would allow a proper pitch above a garage door. Being able to build that closer to a boundary is a must, as 12 feet from a boundary is just not practical. Okay, we will go. Kevin Joyce.
Yes, can you hear me?
We hear you, Kevin.
Hey, Supervisor, thank you for all your hard work and commitment. Really appreciate it. So actually two questions. What is the proposed permitting process for the ALUs? And second, more like secondarily, what's racial about the term grandfathering?
Okay, so permitting process and grandfathering.
Supervisor, would you like me to take that grandfathering question?
Mary. Okay, so it sounds like that the Planning Commission discussed this. Mary Cortina, Braddock District Planning Commissioner.
Well, I don't have direct knowledge, but I know that it came up in the Planning Commission. One of the planning commissioners was concerned because that term originated apparently during the time when African Americans' civil rights were around the voting. It was part of the voting rights that they were using grandfathering as to whether you could vote or not. And so that that is the origin of that term.
I'm actually this reminds me. Yeah, this is the term grandfathering is a post-Reconstruction era term when Black voting rights were circumscribed, and essentially, if you had a white grandfather who looked like my grandfather, you were allowed to vote, and if your grandfather was not white, you were not allowed to vote. So that's the genesis of the term grandfathering. So why don't we? I think there was the question on the permitting process. What's the permitting process for ALUs?
So for the ALUs, we have the two different processes that we're proposing, the administrative permit. And so that's kind of your, I don't know if it'll always be over the counter, but over the counter per se, where, you know, you're filling out an application and you have to submit all the required information and show that it's true, pay your fee, and it's reviewed by staff. And then the special permit process is the one that goes before the BZA and has a also an application and needs a professionally prepared plat, and you pay a higher fee and you have a public hearing. So.
Okay.
And we will be doing inspections too. I mean, we will be getting information like floor plans and photos and things like that that we can use as part of our evaluation of the administrative request.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. That, I think, brings us to the end. I think we got through all of the questions that I saw. I hope I didn't miss anyone. I apologize if I did. I want to thank all of you for participating. I want to thank especially the staff for giving up your evening. Leslie, Carmen, and Casey. I want to thank my staff, Marcia Pate, my land use aide, and Frank Anderson, my chief of staff, Brian Garcia, and June Park. They've spent a lot of time and energy pulling this together and making it work for all of us. So I really appreciate their support. And the next action on this topic will be the January 28th Planning Commission hearing. Am I getting that right? January 28th? Mary, nod your head. Is that right?
This Thursday.
January.
Yeah.
This Thursday. All right. Coming up this Thursday, Planning Commission hearing. So it's an opportunity that is available to watch and participate. fairfaxcounty.gov. You can find the video there. And just final note, if you haven't, please email us, braddock@fairfaxcounty.gov, to sign up for our email updates to learn about more exciting meetings like this. So thank you, everyone. Have a great evening. Please stay safe. If you're going to be driving tomorrow morning, it might be a little bit slippery. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.